Welcome back to Intro to Python Skills for AI, powered by Capital One. This is episode 4, so if you've somehow missed the first 3 episodes of the series, click or tap right here to get taken to where you need to be. But if you're meaning to be here, in this episode, we're going to be covering lists and we're going to be learning about imports. And then once we've done those 2 things, then we're going to jump right into something. It's a little bit difficult. It's going to be the biggest challenge you have done this series so far, but it's going to be a great opportunity to test all of your programming skills. So I'm really looking forward to setting it for you. Now, we managed to finish everything with loops at the end of last episode. So this episode, we're going to jump straight into lists. So what are lists? Well, we've got variables and they store a single value. That's super useful for saying, we need to store a number or a letter or some words. That's great and all, but what if we needed to store a list of related variables? For example, the list of people in my class, or a list of phone numbers who I'm going to go and call. Well, we could technically store it in variables called phone number 1, phone number 2, phone number 3. But, that's not great practice. We should definitely avoid doing that because that's going to become unmaintainable really fast. Instead, we should store them in lists. In other programming languages, if you've kind of dealt with one before, you might have heard them called arrays. But in Python, we call them lists. And all they are is collections of data. So, say we have 5 different people's names, then we can put them all in a list and do really cool stuff with them. Now, there's a few ways we can create lists in Python. So I want you to go and open up lists.py and, let's go and create a place to store some names. Now, first up, I can create names equals, and then we say this is a list with square brackets. Now, there's no names in this list right now, but that's actually fine. We can have an empty list, and it's just there ready for us to store some things in later. That's totally fine to do in Python. And we don't actually need to say how many things are going to go in our list or anything like that. All we're saying is, this is the list, and at some point, we'll put some things in here. But when we create our list, we can actually set a value, just like we do with variables. So let's create a list of planets. So I'm going to say planets equals, and here's the bit where I have to remember a lot of planets, but I'm going to, use my square brackets again. And then let's store strings of each planet's name. So we have Mercury. Remember, because it's a string, we put it in quotes. We have Venus. We have, Earth. Obviously, that's a pretty big one. And, one more I'll go and add is Pluto's not really a planet anymore, but, we don't want it to feel left out. So let's say Pluto as well. Okay, so obviously if I run this code right now, remember, it won't do anything because I've not actually told it to do anything. All it's going to do is, just set these, effectively variables. Just remember, they're lists. It'll just set that. It's not going to do anything, and that's not super useful. So let's just see what happens, say, if we print them to the console. So let's do print names. Let's do print planets. And then I'm going to go and open my console. And then obviously we're running lists.py. So let's do python lists.py. And there we go. It's outputting to a console. I have an empty list and I have a list with some values. But what are the main things I'm going to do with a list? Let's pause the video for a second. What are the main things when we're using lists we need to be able to do? There's a pretty obvious couple. Well, we need to be able to add and remove things from lists, really, don't we? We've created names, but right now, names is empty. And when I'm building my program, I need to be able to do things, like add them. So let's go and add a load of names of MLHs to our list. Now, listen carefully to me right now, because this might confuse you a bit. But I'm going to do names.append, and I'm going to say Swift. And I'm going to add another person. I'm going to do names.append Brian. They're both 2 people who work here at MLH. Now, notice that I did names.append. Now, say we wanted to add something to the planets list, we wouldn't do names.append because we're appending to names. So when I go and run our code again, what do you think we're going to get an output in names? What do you think is going to be the order of what I've added? See if you can guess. Well, if I go and run python lists.py, you'll see we get Swift and then Ryan. Now, that hopefully makes a bit of sense to you. You'll see that, we added Swift first, so Swift is first on our list. And then we added Ryan, and so it added Ryan after Swift, because append means add to the end of, right? That makes sense. Now, the really cool thing about lists is, say we only wanted to get the first thing in our list of names. Say we just wanted to know who had registered first for something, or, who was first in line. Then we're able to access the value in a list. So say I want to, let's get rid of print planets. We don't need this right now. But say I want to print names 1. Pause the video. Who do you think we're going to get the name of when I run that code? Okay, let's go and find out. Let's do python lists.py. And we get Ryan. So if you said Swift, I just got to caught you out then. Remember, when we're using Python and most programming languages, it starts counting at 0. So, we've got Swift and then Ryan. So, Swift is number 0 and then Ryan is number 1, which doesn't mean he's first, it means he's second because, 0, 1, 1 is the second number. Now, the number we're putting in brackets is called an index. So index in programming, you'll hear it all the time. All it means is the kind of order it's in. So the fourth thing will be index 3. The first thing will be index 0. And that's all that means. So if you ever hear someone talking about the index of a value, don't let that confuse you because it is literally just the order things are in. Okay, so there's one last thing I want to make sure you know about lists before we dive into our challenge very, very soon. And that is that you remember how useful loops were? Well, we can loop through lists too. So instead of it just being, us looping 10 times using a range, which literally is just us doing the same thing 10 times, what we can actually do is we can loop through a list. For example, we could say hello to every single person on our list of names, or we could print each of the planets in our list to the console. And then you could do way more advanced stuff with this. So for example, you could build a list of users in your app and print it to a table. Or, you could say for every person I have, then I'm going to add points to their account on a website. So it's a really powerful thing to be able to do to loop through lists. And we're just going to be touching on the very surface here, but just know that this is something which is something you're going to constantly use in a real software project. Okay, but how do we actually loop over lists? So I'm going to go and comment out as printing Ryan's name. We don't need Ryan right now. And I'm going to go and make a new loop. So I'm going to say for planet in planets, print planet. Now, I suspect this might have confused you, but before I kind of explain it, I'm going to run this real quick so you can see what it does. So if I do python list.py, I get Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, and then Pluto. Just like how in our list, they're in that order, right? So it will loop through them in order, which again, can be pretty useful sometimes. But, planets is the name of our list. Where did planet come from? Is Python magic? Does it automatically know what the non-plural version of something is? No, we can actually call planet anything. So for example, I could say for X in planets, print X. And then I can go and run that again. And you'll see it still works perfectly fine. Now, where we say planets is important because that's the thing we're looping through. But for is just for each thing. So, for readability, I'm going to call it planet because it is a planet, but we can actually call it anything. The easiest way to think of it is it's just a reference to the thing that's currently being looped through. So the first time this loops through, well, planet will equal Mercury. And then the second time it loops through, planet will equal Venus. And so, play around a bit if that's still confusing you. But the key important thing I need you to get is that when we say in planets, that's really important because that's what we're telling Python we're looping through. But, if we're kind of saying for the planet, well, planet there isn't actually referencing anything. It's just there to make it easy for us to understand what it is. We could call it X and it will still work. But remember, with variable names, we should always call them something easy to understand. Okay, so we've done a ton of things with lists and we've just scratched the surface, but you can have a chance to develop your list skills. Don't worry, you're gonna dive into these right in our challenge. But before I set you our big challenge, I'm gonna introduce you to importing. Now, as you've seen so far, Python has loads of built-in functions. We've used print and upper and range. These are all very, very useful functions inside of Python. But that's right what they are. They are inside of Python. They're included by default. And sometimes we need to extend the functionality of Python by, doing something that it can't do by default. Now, sure, we could write our own code to do that, but sometimes, it's easier if someone else has already written a code for us and we can just use their code. By the way, this is a totally accepted practice. I know sometimes with assignments, people are like, well, I've got to write everything myself. But in the real world, in software development, actually, you'll often use other people's code because it's much easier. For example, if I had to deal with dates and knowing when every leap year is and knowing how every time zone works, it would just be so complicated. But if I can use a module that has been written to do that for me, then I'm going to save a ton of time which I can spend doing better things, such as eating ice cream. Now, we can also import Python files we've written ourselves and use their functions. If that's all sounding a bit confusing, do not worry, because we're going to dive straight into that now. Okay, so let's jump straight into returns.py. And, to be able to return something, we're going to need to write a function that actually does return something. And then we can use this file as our module in a different Python file. But if that just sounds like a lot of complicated words right now, don't worry, it's going to make total sense in just a few minutes. But first up, we need to write a function. And I'd like a function which is going to generate the names to the front of our credit card. So, we've got our first name and our last name, but often login forms or registration forms ask for your first and last name as two separate things. So let's say def create full name, and this is going to take a parameter for your first name, a parameter for your last name, and it's going to return your full name. Now, of course, we're going to have to set full name here to be equal to a variable. Like, we're going to have to work out how to make it be worth the correct value. But how do we do that? Pause the video and see if you can make full name equal to the person's first name and then their last name, formatted correctly. See if you can manage that. Well, I can say full name equals first name, add, and then, we have a space between our two names. So let's do a space in quotes because it's a string, and then add last name. And then we're returning full name. So then if I did result equals create full name for me, so say Jacqueline Biggin, and then I print results for console, then Python returns.py, we get Jacqueline Biggin. Amazing. But say this was to generate the name for the front of a credit card. We need to actually get our name in capital letters because that's what they're formatted like on credit cards. And what if someone, put their name all in lowercase? Is that going to go straight on someone's credit card? Well, yes, that's formatted wrong. And then if that was used somewhere else, that would look terrible, right? Well, let's take a step back. It's important that we standardize our data. So, for example, the form to generate the name for the front of a credit card will not say, hey, make sure you type this in capital letters. We can't always trust the input of our users. They'll often either intentionally or otherwise put the completely wrong thing in, or put the right thing in, just formatted incorrectly. And as programmers, it's our job to catch that and our job to fix it. But how do we fix this? We need everything in capital letters. This is going to generate the full name for the front of a credit card. Well, pause the video, see if you can work out how to do it before I tell you. Give it a Google, because remember, if we're looking for functions we're unfamiliar with, no harm in Googling, and see if you can work out how. Did you find it? Well, it's as simple as saying first name dot upper and last name dot upper. And then it will be as simple as Python returns.py, Jacqueline Biggin in capital letters. Now again, you're not expected to actually know that function off by heart. Just if you know it, then it's something you can use across programming. And then if you don't know it, then just Google it when you need to know it. And I bet some of you have been really smart and realized actually you don't need to convert both the first and last names separately to uppercase, because actually we can just say return full name dot upper and that will work in exactly the same way. Okay, cool. So let's get rid of this code we've been using to test things with. We don't want it getting in the way, and sometimes if we've got things in our files that don't really need to be there, sometimes it can mess things up. So to be safe, let's delete it. But we could have also commented it out in case we might need it later. It's your choice. Okay, so let's now go and head over to imports.py. And we're going to import the file we just added a load of stuff to. And that's really simple. All you're going to do is type import returns. And what this does is it gets all the functions in the returns.py file in this folder, and it makes it so we can use them inside of this file. Okay, so in theory, it should be as simple as me just being like, well, let's go and print like we were last time, and let's say create full name, because that was in our function. And I'm going to just, like last time, say Jacqueline. I'm going to say Biggin, because that should go and print my full name, right? So if I go down to console and I say Python imports.py, then, wait, what? It didn't just go and print our full name in capital letters? It gives us an error. It says create full name is not defined. That's what happens when a function doesn't exist. But our function does exist, right? We created it in the returns.py file. What do you think's going on here? Can you work out why this isn't working? Well, yes, we have a create full name function, and yeah, we imported it from returns.py, but when we say create full name here, when we're printing create full name, we're actually saying the create full name function in this file. And there isn't a create full name function in this file, so we're getting an error saying the function doesn't exist, because to Python, the function doesn't exist. But how do we say, hey, I'm only going to use the create full name function from the returns.py file? Well, that's as easy as saying print returns.create full name, which literally just means the create full name function inside returns.py file. So now, if I go and run python imports.py again, then just as we expected, we get my name in capital letters. Absolutely amazing. So if you're ever dealing with imports, just be aware of that. It catches quite a lot of people out, but now you know to look for it, you should be absolutely fine. Now, one other super useful thing we can do is, we can import modules that we haven't written ourselves. And I know, for example, Python has a module called random. So I can say import random, and this will go, hey Python, I know you have a random module. Can I use you, please? So now when we go and say, let's print, we can say print. And again, I don't expect you to know this syntax. You don't need to know this syntax. You can always Google it. But I know I can do random, and I can say I'd like a random integer, so random integer, between 0 and 100. And now, when I go over and python imports.py, then we'll get Jacqueline Biggin and then 10. And then if we run it again, we'll get Jacqueline Biggin and 88. And again, we'll get Jacqueline Biggin and 69. We'll get different number every single time. Because that's the cool thing. We can use the functionality of this random module, which we've not written, but it's going to be super useful for us in some use cases. In fact, it's going to be super useful for you right now, because I'm about to set you a challenge. So far in the series, we've learned about variables and loops and lists and functions and importing and even more. But I'd like you to write a script that combines these ideas. So I'd like you to go and open the challenge.py file, and you'll see some instructions in there waiting for you. But the TLDR is I want you to create 10 lists of random numbers. The first one will have 0 items, the second will have 1, the third will have 2, and so on and so forth. And each list item should be a random integer. Remember, we just used a random function between 0 and 100. And in that file, there's an example of what it should look like if you print out all the lists. This is going to need you to use a lot of the different skills you've learned. So feel free to go back and look at all the code you've written in past episodes. Go and replay some of the videos as well. And when you've managed to get that working, head over to episode 5, where I'll be showing you the answer on how you can actually do that. But don't go look before you've done it. Practicing is the best way of learning how to code. And this is the first big challenge I've set you, which combines multiple different parts of what you've learned. So give it a shot. I know you can do it, and you got this. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in episode 5 with the answer, as well as a ton of awesome new skills. So see you there.